Call to order. Welcome everyone to the Board of Education meeting. Beth, would you call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Present.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Here.
Mr. Gousset?
Here.
Mrs. Matney?
Here.
And Ms. Wasmith?
Here.
Everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
I moved and seconded. Any comments? Beth, would you call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Yes.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Gousset?
Abstain.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
And Ms. Wasmith?
Aye.
This is one of the times that we have available for people who want to present. Is there anybody here who would like to speak today? Andy, do you have anybody that you would like to present?
I do. So, Grandview Heights, under the board's direction, has embarked upon a K-12 athletic master planning process that is culminating tonight in a presentation of all of that hard work. That included 3 community meetings. It included core team, I'll say 10 core team meetings, along with a group of community members around, I'll say 25 to 30 community members, coaches, administrators, teachers, that met 4 times for 4.5 hours, 5 hours, thinking about the athletic complex just north of Grandview Heights High School. And Perkins and Will led us through a 6 to 8 month process. And one of the things I will share in advance, well, 2 things. The first is, having done similar and like processes now for Larson Middle School as well as Grandview Heights High School, what I learned through that process is consensus is a great thing. Getting 100% agreement among a group of 30 people is just next to impossible or insanely unlikely. What was unique in this process is we had 100% agreement on what Perkins and Will is going to present among the core committee of 30 people, which is remarkable. But I think it speaks to the process that we followed, along with the core values we established and the need that exists over there. The final thing I do want to present, and I do think this is important for our community here, as well as our Stevenson Elementary teachers to hear, that this is a master plan, and this board and governance team has no decisions, no plans at this time to go to the community members for a bond levy regarding athletics. And that still in the forefront of all of our minds is addressing the facility needs and deferred maintenance among our schoolhouse buildings. And we all recognize that Stevenson Elementary has not been yet addressed as part of our K-12 master plan that we did, well, we finished, 5 years ago now. So I think it's important just to make sure that everyone understands all of those moving parts in advance of this presentation. But I also think importantly, this master plan allows us and gives us a roadmap to prioritize our expenditures with regard to the athletic plan in a way that in the absence of having a master plan, we would not be able to do. And what we found ourselves doing in certain instances is spending money backwards. And there's a myriad of examples I can give, but at this point I won't, because we have our esteemed colleagues ready to present virtually on the K-12 athletic master plan. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
I will tell you when. Momentarily. can you hear us?
Yeah, it's a little faint, Chris.
Okay. The microphone's up there, board, so when you talk, you're talking to that microphone.
Okay, okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Very good. And you can see what I'm sharing on the screen, I take it.
Yes.
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 Is that a thumbs up?
See a blue bobcat.
Lots of thumbs up, okay. Are we all set, Chris?
We are all set.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to have the design team present with you tonight, more virtually than not. I know that Patrick Condren is there as part of the Concord Addis team, the owner's rep. He will be sharing some information on costs at the very end of the presentation, but I'm Steve Turks, principal with Perkins & Will, one of the leaders of our K-12 practice. I'll ask the other folks who are virtually in the meeting with us to introduce themselves.
Yeah, Amy Eckman, Perkins & Will, K-12 practice leader as well. Thanks for having us.
And Corey Nissenberg, also from Perkins & Will, project architect with K-12.
Hello, good evening, everyone. This is Matt McGrath with MKSK. We're the landscape architects and planners on the project. Good to see everyone.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share the master plan with you this evening. We were asked to keep our remarks to right around 15 minutes. So what that means is we're going to be we each have a speaking part here. I'm going to kick things off. We're going to spend a little bit more time looking at the actual, with Matt McGrath, so planning, the master plan plans for the two options that are in your books. I understand you all have hard copies. I think I could kind of see you flipping through those. And we are happy to answer any questions that you might have and to dive into as much detail as you would like us to. But just to get you acquainted with the document that's in front of you, I'm just going to sort of flip through this quickly. I'll do sections of it, and Amy and Corey will as well. Little introductory letter that I just flipped by, a table of contents. I'll pause on for just a second. It's just, as any table of contents does, it lays out for you, where to find the various pieces and parts that are in the master plan. There is a rather large appendix that we, with council with Andy, decided not to print. It's several hundred pages long. We will be providing that in a digital copy for you all. It's the full physical adequacy assessment, which I think you may have been copied on already. It's mostly process information from our workshops, the presentations that we did, the notes that we took, photographs and so forth, just to really document the process. So that if there's ever questions like, do we remember what we talked about in workshop 2, you can kind of dial the reel back and be able to find that information. So we decided not to cut down any more trees than we needed to for this evening, and we decided to keep that digitally for you. So the master plan document itself, Andy did a nice job introducing kind of the notion of the master plan. We've got this in blue beam this evening so that we can zoom in for you. But the master plan, as Andy rightfully mentioned already, one of its big goals really is to help you spend thoughtfully and judiciously on the athletic campus. It does take into account the condition of the existing facilities and structures, not just the buildings, but the landscape, the field amenities and so forth. It marries that with the condition of those, in other words, what kind of repairs are needed just to maintain and keep those facilities going, along with what are the programmatic needs. So whether we're talking about Title IX or ADA accessibility or fill in the blank, sort of marries those together to begin to create options and solutions that address those needs. And then overlaid on top of that is the budget analysis that then begins that assigns costs to those various components and those various options. And then out of that comes the master plan. Master plans are generally considered to be, kind of what we call a living document, something that can be updated. It's not necessarily something that needs to all happen at one time. It can be, and you'll see this when we get to Matt's portion of the presentation, phased in over time. We've got a schedule here, the schedule that we followed for the master plan. I'm not going to talk about that in any real detail. But so let's just keep rolling along here. Andy mentioned there were a lot of participants involved in the process, from core team members to a couple of folks from the city of Grandview, some coaches, faculty members, and so forth. So good participation in the process.
So I'll take it over from here. The physical adequacy assessment, this was the first thing that we targeted in this process, where we had the entire design team out to the site to look at the entire facility as it is today. We've heard already, Andy mentioned a little bit about this and Steve mentioned a little bit about this. But this entire document, which is in the appendix, really just gives a good baseline of what's there today and what needs to happen to bring the buildings up to code, and also take care of just the issues of necessary repairs that need to happen for the facilities today. So the thing that this does not do, which is a clear line to draw, is any programmatic elements that are not on the site today, such as there's a desire for more locker rooms to provide more equal facilities for men and women's sports. That will not be addressed in this assessment. This is purely just looking at what's there today and code and repair upgrades that need to be done to the facility. And so what we really did was we walked the site, engineers, architects, and Matt, Rick were there, Patrick and Doug, I believe, were both there. We all walked the site to get a good grasp of what would a baseline cost be just for these repairs, and that baseline cost is then used for comparison when we come up with the final master plan for this process of what's the difference in those costs, because there really is a cost for not doing anything, and that would be just general maintenance and repair that the school needs to spend on a regular basis. So there's a cost to that. And if upgrades are made, if new buildings are put on site, if bleachers are replaced, those maintenance fees and those costs generally will be less on new facilities than some of the old facilities that need to be constantly worked on. And one strong example is the home stadium bleachers, which is a quite old facility that needs quite a lot of repair to prevent leaking into the locker rooms below, something like that. And those types of costs are really good to have a baseline understanding of what is the school paying now to maintain the facilities. So really that's what this assessment was done to do. And it was done at the beginning to provide a baseline as we move forward. And this whole assessment was then presented to the workshops early on to give everyone a good understanding of where we are at, where the school is at with the facilities at the moment. So I'll pass over to Amy to continue talking about some of the survey.
Yeah, so to kick off the process and gather as much feedback from the community and everyone who comprises your school facilities today, we send out an online survey. Over 500 responses were recorded, and you'll hear many of these themes over and over again as we talk tonight. The common results and also the top priorities for the survey themes were equity in restrooms and locker rooms, accessibility, and safety and security. And there's a few other things that rise to the top as well, the track configuration as well. We can go to the next page. So there's lots more detail behind this in that appendix. There's a couple of snippets of, again, priorities and the satisfaction with different areas. But you'll see those same themes echoed here, and those priorities I just mentioned down at the bottom there.
And not surprising, restrooms.
Yeah, restrooms were top.
Big
Yeah,
part
so
of it.
that equitable restrooms and locker rooms, you'll just hear over and over again. So we've already talked a little bit about the workshop process. It occurred over a few months. Again, it included that whole long list of 36 plus people that Steve mentioned, with a great community and the school. And each workshop we built upon the last one, and the purpose of the first workshop was to come up with guiding principles for the master plan that would guide the option development. And I think, so these looked a lot like this, small groups with some written output. The guiding principles you'll see here, important to talk about that. Number one was inclusivity and equity, addressing ADA and Title IX. Security and safety, both physical space, protecting the space, and also personal safety, human safety, and coming up with guidelines for public use, again, for safety and responsibility and taking care of the site. Efficiency, multi-use, in its functionality and utility so that it can change over time. Aesthetics, having pride in the spaces that you have on your campus, welcoming and easy to navigate the site as well. Talked a lot about the spectator experience and what that's like and how to accommodate that in the master plan. And keeping the important elements of tradition, like the entry gate and the bell, they could be relocated, but making sure we pay homage to the history of the site as well. And finally, quality over quantity. So definitely maintainability and quality and sustainability is also part of the outcomes there. Master Plan Workshop 2, I won't talk too much about, but we shared that baseline cost that Corey talked about and that Steve talked about. So we shared what would fix to just kind of bring everything up to speed with the facilities that were there today and when that would need to occur in a timeline just based on the condition of it. And that investment was a little over $7 million just for the baseline cost. From there were themes that came out of the workshop. We also looked at site plans and asked about those themes. And you're going to see those themes echoed in the final options. But again, bleachers, whether there was strong sentiment to replace, but again, cost is always a factor. The track would be 6 lanes with a proper straightaway. Everybody loved the idea of central building facility. And again, there's more things you're going to see in more detail in the final schemes that Matt's going to share, but the same themes were echoed. And again, that consensus that Andy talked about was found in every conclusion here. So these are just the options. You can certainly review these that we looked at, looking at different facilities, potentially softball, potentially tennis, how that might come onto the site. And those were ultimately decided to not move on to the site and stay where they were. In the final workshop, we again sketched on paper with small groups, and there's essentially one option that has a slight variation to it. The options you'll see I'll foreshadow a little bit is really just the difference is home bleachers staying and as existing and being repaired, or tearing those down and putting new bleachers in place that accommodate the master plan. So that changes a few little minor pieces throughout, but the committee was unanimous in its embracing of the themes, and the master plan talked about honoring the program while reducing cost. And as Andy mentioned, the phased approach to try to take care of the needs in a way that makes sense, that are going to follow the master plan, and they will happen right away. With the short-term priorities being accessibility, the track repair and reorientation of the straightaway, as well as restrooms. And one side note that, again, you'll hear more about is consolidating the cell towers on the site, which will help the master plan come to fruition and clean up the site, if you will. And there's, funding logical items through logical sources, of course, like you might buy equipment through an athletics budget versus the master plan budget. And new home bleachers are also a priority. And as Andy mentioned, the group felt that Stevenson also needs to be considered when discussing this work. So these are the further developed options, and what you'll see tonight, what Matt will present to you, are the final options that came out of the workshop. So I think we can buzz through these, but you can certainly reference them. And Matt, I don't know if we want to dwell on this page or just go right into the options, Steve?
I don't think we need to. Unless the board would like us to, I think Matt will sort of explain verbally, and you'll be able to see it on the planning document here, what is contained on those earlier pages. But as Amy already alluded to, I personally sort of thought we would come out of the other end of this with perhaps more options, but there was such unanimous opinion about things that should or should not be on the site, things that should or should not be replaced, that it began to actually narrow things down quite a bit. With really the one sort of the difference that you'll see here is whether or not the home side stadium bleachers are retained and maintained or replaced. Matt.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Steve. So what you're seeing here, this is we're going to kind of build on as we go here, but through all the hard work that Amy described, working with the various sessions, we had come up with a kind of a series of plan tests, and those were the diagrams that are in the book that kind of resulted in what is the final plan that received quite a bit of unanimous consensus. So part of the challenge then was, okay, now that we have our grand vision, how do we think about phasing this, or how do we think about strategically identifying goals and objectives in a way that can be phased in over time. And so that's what we're going to walk through here with these next kind of series of slides, and they'll kind of build on themselves until we reach what the final full master plan vision will be as outlined in the document here. So this is what we're calling phase one, and here again, knowing that the priority is really the bleachers, the restrooms, the track. Those were some of the items that I identified here. So, and I'll kind of very, very quickly walk through this, but the idea here is that the track would get replaced. The track actually gets reversed then over to the north side. So that kind of, right there. So that is a more logical place for that, as we've learned. Making sure that the bleachers are fully ADA accessible was a big thing, and again, kind of diagrammatically representing that there would need to be improvements to make the bleachers fully ADA for not only accessibility but for seating and visuals as well. And then there would be likely to be some improvements to some of the concrete work, some of the site work, just to make that a little bit more accessible for the bleacher systems. Amy alluded to kind of consolidating the cell tower enclosure, and that's that building that you're seeing there. The intent is to kind of clean that up, put it in one location in the site, but then also kind of combine that with other program in kind of a shared space that would also include restrooms, small concessions, and likely some dumpster enclosure too. So we're kind of consolidating all that in kind of one mass there, and kind of cleaning up the access then off of North Star for truck access. They can use all of that. Then looking over to the east side of the site off Fairview, in this phase, recommendation is replacing the visitor bleachers and then adding the new band bleachers there to the south. And then finally with the track as well, I should have mentioned this would include new D-ring areas. So there would be the new, the synthetic surfacing, which, you know, it's grass we know is today. So that would all be part of this phase. And then finally, you know, something that we all have to deal with is some of the utility work and some of the requirements that the city requires for stormwater and stormwater detention and maintenance. And that would be part of what would be included in this phase as well. So, and then if we go to the next slide, this kind of builds on itself. So as Steve mentioned, there was a lot of consensus about what we call kind of the central building there, which the idea is that there is a new building that would eventually support a program that would happen to the north of the site with some of the baseball and the throws areas, but also with the south areas as well, and adjacencies to the field and the track areas as well. So that would come online in the second phase. And the thinking is that would include, you know, new locker rooms, coaches' rooms, trainer room, and then potentially a new access there. Yeah, there you go, off of Fairview Avenue. So the idea is to really, and that was a real big theme in the working sessions, was to really kind of centralize a lot of that program so that it's accessible both for areas within the stadium, but also areas to the north for the open field space, the football or the baseball complex, and some of the practice field areas. So that's kind of the big move in the second phase. The third phase then, and you can kind of see as it's building on itself, we're starting to see the full plan here with the full master plan, with reorienting the baseball complex, kind of flipping it to the kind of the southwest there. Developing a bit of a secondary entry, a little bit of a secondary entry plaza there that would serve, you know, new bleachers, and that would then, you know, companion itself with the concessions building, that cell tower building that we had talked about there. And so that's kind of the biggest chunk of this, really, the new baseball complex coming online in this phase. The hope here is that we can, what we're showing here, and this is another discussion we had with the working group, was adding some head-in parking on Fairview and then along North Star as well. And then what that does is present the opportunity to maybe get rid of that parking along the south of the site. And that turns itself into a bit more of a ceremonial entry to the entire stadium complex that would work in tandem with the high school entry, the main high school entry there off of West 3rd. So, so that parking lot would go away. There would be some added access points to the stadium complex, and then 2 flanking buildings there that would have restrooms as well as concessions in them as well. So again, in this phase, we thinking about stormwater and thinking about regulatory needs for that would be included, likely when the fields come online to the northern piece of the site. So so you can kind of see as it builds upon itself. This option then, as Steve alluded to, would recommend maintaining the existing bleachers. We did consider a second option, and it actually, you know, very similar format, would look at replacement of the bleacher complex. That replacement would actually incorporate some of the band bleachers, some of the basically a bit more seating in there. But what it does in this phase, is Steve's kind of flip to, that central building would shrink a little bit, because the idea is we would kind of tuck some locker room space under that new complex there. Yeah. That's really the only kind of significant difference between the two options, is maintaining or replacement of those bleachers. Yeah. And this shows kind of that third phase, that kind of full build out. Great. So Steve, back to you. I know I kind of went through that quickly, so happy to answer any questions or circle back.
I think that's fine. I'm going to ask Patrick to step up and share a little bit about the costs of each option, and they've got that broken down by phase. Patrick, I've got the larger font summary slide in here as well. If you want to just go straight to that.
We can just pause quick here just to acclimate, since this is what you guys have in front of you. This is obviously a little bit more of a detailed summary sheet, but what we've done, similarly to what Matt laid out, looking at the two primary scenarios and options of maintaining the existing home bleachers, and then on the other side, replacing the home bleachers. We then have broken each of those out into the three phases that were depicted in the previous diagrams there. Steve, if you want to hop over to the more succinct executive summary. Again, for the sake of time and to be concise here, this is a summary exactly of the numbers that you have seen in front of you. To go kind of high level, maybe hit a couple assumptions here. We split it between hard cost and soft cost. So that being hard cost is your construction, any construction management markups. Soft cost on the flip side of that is design, engineering, equipment, furniture, and any appropriate contingencies. We've subtotaled on this high-level summary here for dollars in today's dollars. Knowing right now with the market where it's at and a lot of the volatility, we wanted to set a baseline and then provide something of a benchmark for, say, a 2025 year. But knowing that with a master plan exercise, depending on when the project would move forward, and obviously and hopefully something, a more of a stable market, that we are able to hone in those costs at that time. So wanted to make sure that we were approaching that with clarity and transparency. To hit high level, you'll notice I'll kind of start with the blue side here with the maintaining of the existing home bleachers. If you look at the subtotal in today's dollars of the 22 million, you'll see if you then look at the other side with the replacement of the home bleachers at 23.4 million, not a huge difference between those numbers. And not to say a million plus isn't a huge number, of course, but when you balance with the home bleachers the amount of repair and work to get that up to code, as well as kind of ongoing maintenance, the cost between that and kind of knocking down and building new is relatively close there. So kind of just going to each phase then. Phase one with the maintaining of the existing home bleachers coming in at 9.2 million subtotal. Phase two at 5.5. Phase three at 7.5 for an overall total of the $22 million. And to note, obviously, with numbers these large, this is part of the driver of working to split it up with various phases. Then moving to the replacement of the home bleachers, phase one, which includes that replacement at 12.1 million total. Phase two at 4.4 million, and then phase three, which included the baseball field to the north and that south entry at 7 million. So overall total of that 23.4 million number. Maybe kind of to talk through the total numbers below that, then as I said, as a benchmark for escalation, we wanted to just show what 2025 looks like based on what we've seen over the last couple of years. Again, it's been unprecedented times as far as what those percentages typically look like, again at about 3.5% to 4% a year. And when we look back at 2021, that figure was 20% plus. So for the sake of kind of having a benchmark, we've assumed 6% per year for that escalation if work was to start in 2025. Yeah, I think overall that kind of gives the layout of it. Of course, additional detail within the report, and happy to answer any questions as well.
I have a question. So just so I'm clear, the numbers that you're looking at here are to address just one of the issues of the structure that needs immediate attention? Am I understanding that right?
So we would include.
This is not like the complete project based on one of the phases that, or one of the master plans that we would.
Yes, this would be inclusive of, of those options. So
Okay.
on the left with the existing of the home bleachers, that would include any required ADA.
Oh, I understand, okay.
ADA fixes as well as kind of structural reinforcement and rework over the life of that. The replacement of the home bleachers option, of course, would be the demolition and full replacement in kind.
But then would also include other adjustments? I'm just trying to understand what this cost covers,
So
2 million, based on what we've seen here of the different options available to us. Like, are we looking at proposing a $22 million bond issue that we would ask the community to vote on, or are we, like, how much total are we talking about?
I think if you look at each of the phases, and that's probably part of the strategy of what the priorities are. Phase one for each of those was look to address the home bleachers, whether it be maintaining of the existing and really getting those ADA upgrades and repairs done in phase one versus a replacement, which would be carried in phase one of that second option to the right. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think based on how this was handled with the school buildings, then am I to understand that we would vote on which one we want? We would get the full cost, and then we would go to the community, with how
Yeah.
much? But if we wanted to, like, immediately address just the bleachers, this is how much we're talking about.
Yeah, correct. So in essence, the total cost in the event that, let's just hypothetically say that we didn't do anything, and 5 years from now, we decided that we were going to do the whole thing, and we were going to go to the community members for a combined, certainly to include Stevenson and this. So all-in costs are on the bottom right
Okay.
for that. And so what we asked Concord Addis and Perkins and Will to do is to phase the master plan into different chunks that made sense sequentially. And so when they talk about phase one, phase two, phase three, what they did is they got together and discussed, okay, if you were going to chunk the first phase of this, what would make the most sense to do first? And in essence, what these schematics of phase one outline is the track, the stadium, in essence, and then a restroom facility. And that would address a new track, ADA into the stadium, and new restrooms. And they put a cost to that. And then after that, they got together and they said, okay, sequentially, the next thing you would do would be this, and that was phase two, and then they put a cost to that. And we asked them to do that because the total cost to do all of it all at once was daunting and a little overwhelming. And so correspondingly, we were thinking that perhaps it would make sense to disaggregate and phase this project incrementally and over time. And so we were interested in getting a roadmap to do that so we could take smaller bites of the apple and sequentially what made sense. And then secondly, what would the cost be to do that?
Would there
So-
be,
so-
would
so-
there be any savings to doing it all at once?
Well, I think that there would be, well, yes.
Inflation,
Yeah,
inflationary for one,
inflation,
but.
yeah.
Right.
And so, you know, as Patrick outlined, inflation this past year was just north of 20%. So doing it all at once, you would avoid future inflationary costs.
We have that, right?
Yes.
That's the 2000,
Correct.
that's the, if you're on the right hand
That's
side.
correct.
That's the 23.4 versus the 27.3. But what I'm saying is, short of that, so the 23.4, that's over 3 phases. What if it was all done at once? What would the today value be if we did all 3 phases all at once?
It would certainly be less. To what degree, I'd like to work that up, of course, but there is inherently built in understanding that you're breaking it up, that there's going to be some rework at a number of the connecting points, putting down asphalt that might need to be brought up in the next phase just to make sure that the concurrency of them works. And that's part of the strategy that we looked at just to lay out these scenarios of what's an efficient manner in
Sure.
breaking these pieces out where you're not, say going and redoing the track and then pausing there, going back and doing the D-rings, or that's where you get a lot of inefficiency. But I'd say we look to break it up in a way that did minimize that inefficiency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was kind of like when, because I was a part of the big group meetings of 30 people or however many it was, but Yeah, that was part of it. The total cost seemed really daunting, but it was like, just like the point of the master plan was to make sure we weren't spending money unwisely by like spending it on things that we then later had to undo. Similarly, this idea of phasing was like, well, so tell us, if we can't do it all at once, how can we do it in a way that is the most cost efficient? Although not probably, as you say, not as efficient as doing it all in one fell swoop, but
But this doesn't address like the full picture
yeah,
of
it
the project.
does. It does.
So like the baseball,
Yeah.
It's
Of
two
those three
options with three
phases
phases.
altogether would be the whole thing.
and it's just 22, 23 million to do all of that? New concession stands.
All this, yep.
And I think, Patrick, just confirm if this is correct. The costs, I think to Kevin's question, these costs are all in today's dollars. Even though they're separated into three phases, those are all in today's dollars.
Correct.
So in terms of saving, inflation is not built in even in phase three. So there are some savings if we did it all at once, just like you explained, because connecting points between phase one and phase two and some of that work, which would be more efficient to do it all at once, but there's not inflation actually
Exactly.
built into these. So these are
And-
all today's numbers.
And the reason for that being, from a timing standpoint, doing phase three, 5 years from now versus
Right.
10 years from now obviously represents a different
Right.
baseline cost. So wanted to at least have it be apples to apples.
Sure.
For understanding's sake.
In our, I'm like, binder, is there, so phase one, like there's phase one, phase two, phase three for both options. And to maybe Kevin's point, unless it's, I just glossed over it and didn't see it, how long will phase one take? How long will phase two take? How long will phase three? Like, are these things that could be, and I'll get to the point of why I'm asking this, how much disruption are we gonna have in our community athletic programs, things like that?
Sure.
For each, and if there's a page on it that says how long this is gonna take, I missed it.
We haven't laid out a kind of a specific
Okay.
per phase duration. Generally, we, from kind of a phasing and length of, contractors being on site, we've estimated about 8 to 12 months, say, per phase.
Okay.
But that's more of a benchmark for the purpose of incorporating dollars.
Yeah, I
versus-
can talk about that a little bit, and I think that's a good insight, and it's something that we can work to add to the document. It's nothing necessarily finite and final about the document that's in front of you. But just from experience with other projects, it's not would not be uncommon to necessarily like replace a track over the course of a summer, for instance.
Okay.
Could the ADA work be done on the stadium over a summer? I think we would need to get a little bit further into the design of it to see if that could happen in the summer. But for instance, like building the cell enclosure, and it's probably worth noting if I zoom into this, that even though it's all drawn with a solid color, this is basically an open yard. It's got walls around it to basically hide all of that kind of messy equipment, but it's open to the sky. And each of the cell providers would have their own sort of zone for their equipment within that. It's really the left half of this building that is enclosed and conditioned. But that's a project that doesn't necessarily need to encumber any of your ongoing programs. Is that a summer project? No, it's going to take a little bit longer to do that, to consolidate all the cell equipment. But I don't know that it necessarily needs to encumber programs either. The visitor bleachers, it's an easy summer project. Just because of the way that those are constructed, and I built a fairly simple foundation for those and then set them in place. When you get to phase two, on the other hand, we're looking at option one, which keeps the existing bleachers. But I mean, this is a real building. That's not a summer project. That is, 9, 10, maybe even 12 months to do that. That being said, it's being built into the berm. One of the reasons it's in the location it's in is it's central, one, but it's also not on very usable playfield space. Now, that being said, when you build a building, you've got construction activity that happens around it, right? So the zone that it's going to take to actually build that is obviously bigger than the building, as you know from what you see on site today, even. So would that begin to creep into some other activities? Yeah, it probably would, especially track and field. I don't know that it would encumber baseball as much. It would certainly probably cause a little bit of encumbrance on the practice field that's here, though. Then the final phase is perhaps the most potentially invasive, with all the redevelopment of the south end of the site, the addition of these 2 buildings, moving baseball. So there's a lot that's happening in this phase in terms of the amount of ground that's being touched. And so could baseball be moved over the course of the summer? I don't know, because you've got to build dugouts. It's probably going to take a little bit longer to do that. But good news is baseball season is not in the fall. So if we started right after the season was over with, could it be ready for the next season? Yeah, I would think so.
So put
I don't know if that helps you at all or not, but
a little bit.
just based on other experience.
So put it another way, if this were just an ideal world, my Disney, we've already put together the same thing for Stevenson. We've gone to the voters, we've been approved. If we were to do this, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we're looking at, I'm gonna just wildly say 3 to 4 years, give or take.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, so that's one
Yeah.
of those. And if, I think a little bit to Katie's point, we could opt for phase 1 and 2 and not do a 3. Like that's
You could,
that's
absolutely.
how we could piecemeal it out, not piecemeal it
That's
out,
right.
but that's,
That-
but with that, it's good information to say that each phase, give or take, about a year.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I
again,
mean,
I
it's-
think Steve made good
it's- I'm
points
not-
on
Yeah, I
parts
think
and
that-
pieces, and
But
That's
that's
a-
one of those, just to know, like, wherever we're at,
Mhm.
we could do phase 1 now, wait 5 years, do phase 2.
That's right.
Like, that's the,
That's exactly right.
that's
That's
the.
exactly right.
and that-
That's the point. I mean, we're trying to make it so that any endpoint in terms of the phases are, I would say that's generally true. And the caveat I'll explain in a moment, but I've got phase 2 on the screen here. If the one question you would ask yourself as a school board would be, if this were ultimately it, right? We didn't do phase 3, are we happy with this? The downside to this would be baseball stays where it is, and parking stays where it is. The south end doesn't get redeveloped. The plus side of this, though, is you've got some additional restrooms and a small concession. You've got locker rooms. You've got an accessible stadium, whether it's new or renovated. But you don't have the full complement, though. You'd be keeping the existing concessions, right? And we may ultimately need to add some additional toilets someplace on the site, because we've got some additional restrooms for sure happening in phase 3 here in the south of the stadium. But is this an endpoint? It could be with some slight modifications to it, right?
Don't get
Now,
me.
the caveat I was mentioning is phase 1, on the other hand, if you look at the list of priorities, even in the report that was done before we were on board, that Brad led back in 2017, Andy, I think it was.
Yeah.
One of those priorities was handling Title IX, which this does not do in phase 1, right? So the locker rooms that you have below the stadium are the ones that you have, right? So there's a real inequity that still exists if this were the stopping point. Phase 2, that gets much, much better.
Thank you. This is looking at phase 3.
Yep.
It's gorgeous. Like, I can, in my head, I'm like, oh, that's gonna be beautiful, but there's a lot of other decisions that have to happen before there. But looking at it, and I wanna thank you, because I can see it. And I'm not necessarily paper to, this is gorgeous. and it's gonna do so many things. I don't think we're there yet near this decision, but I'm like, you've hit this is an amazing project.
And Molly, I would just validate, if I may, your statement, and I know Emily was present, the excitement in the room among the 35 people that engaged in four separate 4.5-hour-long meetings. The excitement was equally as real. I mean, it was really, really quite awesome to see that and feel that, and also to get such unanimous consensus was equally as exciting, because that doesn't happen very often anymore.
No, and it's amazing. And I say this just personally, like, I'm not there yet, but looking at it, I'm like, oh boy, there's so much potential. So thank you.
And one thing to add, an example that Andy's given a few times is there's money that's being spent on the site every year anyways, right? There's facility maintenance that's happening. And for example, Andy's mentioned the track before, as we had a long discussion of, does this become an 8-lane track? Is that something the school wants? And that question can simply prevent the school from doing any repairs to the track, because they don't. Because generally the question is, is repairing it going to just be putting money into somewhere that then it's going to be ripped out in a few years because an 8-lane track is what's desired? By doing this process, even if this master plan isn't something you tackle right away, you now know, well, if the track is something that is desired to be done, you can have it replaced and fix the spur to the north, which helps with timing of events. And by doing that, you know, even if you decide to do this plan a few years later, now you've spent money in the right direction.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that specifically, that the unanimous agreement of maintaining a 6-lane track was something that I was kind of surprised at, but pleasantly so. And, you know, for example, in this whole thing, that's something that I would anticipate the school district is going to do, probably, perhaps even the first thing in this whole, and it's going to happen before we're tackling a $22 million project.
That's right.
It's just
That's
going to
right.
be something that has to happen before then.
Yeah. But now we know.
Yeah.
And that decision took us a while to get to, but it was unanimous in the end.
Yeah.
Yep, it's a decision.
Right. But and just to further to discuss that, had we landed conversely on an 8-lane track, there would have been implications to the visitor stands, the home stands, just for example. So it was a good decision, I think.
Yeah, there's a big ripple effect with an 8-lane track. It's, as Andy said, there's
Which speaks to the importance of having a master
lighting,
plan.
stadium lighting, everything. Yeah.
I want to delve a little bit, this is one of the earlier things, I think, and a real dividing point, as you accurately point out, is this new versus renovation of the main stands. And as we have the team here and it's all fresh on your minds, just walk us through, like, we can say, okay, new versus renovated, but I think one valuable thing is you have thought of, okay, here is a level of new that would include certain things and have certain features and a cost to that. And obviously, there's choices to be made along the way, but, okay, so that's a standard. And you've also looked at the renovations and said, well, it's not just, put a paint job on it, it's, to renovate. So help us think through, what's the difference? If in the end, for fans sitting there or for, anything else that would be, an experience for the school, whether it's, for the players themselves or the band or, but really for the fans and their experience, and aesthetics, just what's the difference between A and B there, of what we would get at the end?
One more thing to add to that, the
Sure.
maintenance.
I mean, I can start and others can jump in as they feel like I've left something out. But a couple of things about the existing, your existing structure, your existing home site, stadium bleachers. Obviously, you all know that They were built back in the 30s. It's a very robust structure. I don't think the structural engineer necessarily looked at it and said, you've got an issue structurally here. One of the issues with that facility, one is its age. You know, the restrooms really do need some attention. But one of the issues with it is that what you're sitting on when you're a spectator is basically the roof of the open space below. And it's a bit of a tough conundrum to try to keep, because you don't put typical roofing systems, right, on that type of thing. You're basically applying coatings to the top surface of the concrete to try to keep the weather out of it. And as the school has experienced in recent years, Andy, I forget how many years ago it was spend upwards of $200,000 to sort of reapply that coating. That would just be an ongoing maintenance issue for you.
I'm sorry,
So-
are you saying, Steve, that with the option of renovating those bleachers, that we
Yeah.
would have the same things underneath and we would have,
We would be renovating what's below. I think we were ultimately looking, Eric, to try to swap in as much storage down in here as possible. That's why this central building in this scheme is bigger than it is in the other scheme. The other scheme, we're putting some locker rooms below. We could show you some images from other projects where we've done that. We're basically building a building that has a normal buildings kind of system roof below an aluminum bleacher system. So to give you a sense of what that aluminum system might look like, I would suggest you just take a 10-minute drive up to Upper Arlington and take a look at that bleacher system. It's the same basic system with full, what we call sort of a full tread and riser type of system. So try to prevent, I've had this experience that you probably have too, where you're sitting in an older aluminum bleacher system and you drop your phone and you find yourself on the ground looking for it, or whatever, an umbrella or whatever, right? It drops to the ground. The newer systems, have a full riser, and it keeps children from from exploring the cracks of your bleachers and other things from falling through. So appearance-wise, it's very nice, very sturdy. It's very maintainable. It's aluminum, right? We're not trying to keep. It's not trying to be a roof at the same time that it's trying to be a bleacher system. We can build a building below that with normal walls, a normal roof system that you can get to and maintain. So there's really sort of the big difference. There's a capacity difference. We've got more seating capacity in the new bleacher system. If I go to that site plan, what you're going to find is that this is a little bit of a bigger footprint. If I zoom in, you can just see those light lines there. Those are some locker rooms below, and that central building then gets smaller as a result. But the band bleachers are incorporated into this as well. So it gets the band up into the stands, which can make it fun for the home side crowd to have them there. So I would say the big differences in both cases, they should be ADA accessible when we're done with them. A little bit easier to do that with a new bleacher system than your current one, but it's a doable project.
If we can,
From the perspective of walking or driving, we can certainly work to create these buildings below to be as nice looking as possible while still being economical. You will though be looking into sort of the backside of that bleacher system. And I think in the first pricing exercise we did price wrapping this with a sort of a brick wall enclosure to try to dress it up a little bit, and the committee really felt like that wasn't necessary. It was not a necessary expenditure, so that was pulled out of the master plan.
I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. So if we keep the old existing bleachers, we would have to continually reapply that seal to the roof on a 5-year basis-ish.
Yeah, there's definitely will be ongoing maintenance that will be needed for that. Those coatings are good today, but they don't last forever. And they don't last nearly as long as a regular building roof system, right? Because they're essentially, it's a coating that goes on that concrete. So you can imagine with just wear and tear, foot traffic, there is a major structural joint right dead center, right on your, I think it's on your 50-yard line even, that goes through that building where they sort of act structurally independent from each other. That's always a tricky joint. In any building, an expansion joint is a tricky joint. In this case, even more so because of the nature of it. So that's always a spot that's, and I know it's leaked there in the past. It's just going to be prone to leaking in the future as well.
So Steve,
Go with.
yeah, so, a couple other, clarifications there. So one is, if we went the route of the new bleachers, what would be the expected duration of aluminum bleachers?
In terms of the construction?
Yeah, like we put those up and you were like doing long-term planning of the next 50 years, is there an expected lifespan?
I could be wrong. Matt may know the timing better than I do, but I think that I'm going back to Upper Arlington now as just sort of a case study. I think the field got turned over before the year was out, but the bleacher system was up for that next fall season. And
Steve, he's wanting to know like total longevity of.
What's the lifetime?
Warranty, like how long it's gonna,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I would, Eric, to be able to answer that with, a factual answer, I'd have to talk to the bleacher manufacturer. But they last a good long time. They really do. Now, your current stadium's been there since 1930. Will it last that long? Probably not, right? Case in point, your visitor bleachers are, sort of a similar type of system. I don't think they've been there as long as the concrete bleachers, and they are in need of a replacement. Now, one of the differences there, though, is that system has got a steel structure, which is, as you know, prone to rust. And not that we wouldn't necessarily have steel in this, but the seating and all those components are aluminum in that system, so not prone to rusting.
Okay. And then with the option of renovating the current, it's a pretty hefty price tag still, so what goes all into that you would see a difference? So, I think, the common thing would be like, oh, well, it's new versus just keep it as is. So I'm trying to understand what's the difference, for the, with the renovation. Yeah.
I think, Steve, do you want to maybe touch on the?
Sure, Patrick put those numbers together,
Yep.
so I'll maybe ask him to
Yeah, so
share a little bit about those.
a couple key components there. What we have included is if we look kind of exterior and addressing the ADA issue, we have exterior work leading up to kind of the southern portion of the southern and northern portion of the existing bleachers. So we have some ground and concrete work that's fairly heavy duty. We've already touched on some of the structural modifications and reinforcements and coatings. As far as how you would experience that kind of below, we've incorporated looking at the actual wall layouts that we're addressing the ADA sizing issues of the restrooms. We don't have an exact layout of exactly how the locker rooms themselves might adjust based on how we change the restrooms, but we had planned for refinishing, so floors, walls, ceilings. I don't think we would plan to have, just knowing kind of how that existing ceiling is, that would still plan to be kind of open air and exposed. But we would refinish, obviously, new walls, new electrical, new plumbing to address a lot of the shortfalls that we have there now.
What about the press box? Was that addressed at all if you keep the home bleachers?
Yes, we have within phase one, we have that planned for as a replacement.
And that's a really good question. So would there be a difference between the replacement versus new in terms of the overall what's available and experience for the press box area?
Yeah, I would say, and Steve or others, feel free to jump in. We had assumed a similar kind of level of finish for each of the scenarios. Obviously, the details of incorporating it onto the existing would probably be a little bit more challenging than kind of incorporating it on the new, but ultimately the goal is to have that be, again, to maybe reference Upper Arlington. That was a reference project that we looked at as far as just finish level, not necessarily, final design, but we look to get to the same end result in both scenarios.
Anybody else on that topic? Any other follow-up? I did want to ask too about, we mentioned this a little bit, but it was one area that when we were very first starting in this whole process and thinking about things that we were really excited was the cell tower. And that was it really didn't show up really on the comments of people, but I think internally there was a lot of dismay about what we have now and really thinking about a better result here. So I guess I just want to hear the download from, as you went through and thought about that and talked to consultants, and both from a kind of, what's doable, what does it take legally, what does it take financially, is there a payback financially? I mean, I think those are some of the questions too. Just wanted to hear what you found out and could convey to us about that whole discussion.
Yeah, I probably should take that one, Eric. So Chris Bland has been working with the district and really kind of advising the design team sort of on the consolidation of that equipment. In my thinking, there's 5 providers out there right now. I think that actually might be one more than the district was aware of before we started this process. Chris, I think, and I can't speak for Chris, is a real expert in this, as he does this kind of thing all over the country. We got introduced to Chris on the Upper Arlington project, and we're talking about something reasonably similar to what we did with Upper Arlington. And I can tell you there, and I think Chris is optimistic that they would certainly be asked to, this entire enclosure to fund that. What we could get them to do because their lease is going to depend on it. I think that if I understand the legal aspects of this correctly, I think the district has the option to say, goodbye, we don't want you on our site anymore, almost anytime you like. And so you have some leverage, is my understanding. It's also my understanding that they were able to negotiate on the Upper Arlington project a more favorable lease with those providers. And there were some, and I don't know the amount, Eric, I think there were some additional funds that came with it. Now, to the extent of that, I just have no idea. It might be minimal in the overall scheme of things here. I just don't really know. But suffice to say, right now, currently on the site, the equipment is sort of scattershot all over the place. And to get it consolidated into one spot would be an overall benefit a long-term overall benefit to you all. I don't know if that
Yeah,
does justice to your
I would
question
only
or
add,
not.
I think it said differently, all 5 providers would be on what they're calling a monopole. And so,
That's right.
But it isn't just a monopole that's the advantage, which certainly it would be, but also the corresponding square footage of ground in that already dense area that is taken up in some cases what I would describe as prime real estate, that would also be consolidated to that area, thus opening up those areas to make it more friendly, more spectator friendly, which is a win.
So it seems something that's very doable, and I think
Yeah.
it's in phase 1. That's something that we would do early on. That's a real win.
Yeah, we think so, Eric. At one point in time, we actually had this component as a part of the central building, and I think Amy was, pointed out that it'd really be better if we could, because then you would want to do it with that central building and, take care of that sooner. So in order to take care of that sooner and to set you up with a few other items like, concessions, which would definitely be a benefit to this side of the stadium, but really ultimately serves baseball, and some storage and so forth. Doing that in an earlier phase makes good sense.
And
for
some
the-
toilet rooms, which always good to have those added early on too.
Right.
For the sake of budgeting, we had included, for the construction for that, assuming that we would need to take care of that. So if there was any gains or savings from that way, that would come directly off of what we had assumed. It's not a huge number. I think since it's an open air kind of setup right now, I think it'd be just under $200,000. So not a small number, certainly. But yeah, any gains there, just go to the positive.
Well, I guess really for the board, this is a point of thanking and accepting and, appreciating the product we have in front of us. I think, huge, just to have the site plan, things that go where, and some much, much better information than we had before about condition, priorities, community feedback, price, options, all those things. So I feel like, we're much farther along than we were, a year ago or 6 months ago. We have a lot of thinking to do about, what do we go with next steps, and, financing is part of that, and chunking it. So I think that the point that you started with, Andy, is, that is not part of this. That's like separate things that are next steps that we really need to think about and consider options on that. As next steps.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Really excited.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is great.
Guys,
Thank you,
anything else on
Steve
your
and
end?
team.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
It's been our
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you also for all your work behind the scenes to make that run so fluid. Really appreciate it. Seriously. Thanks, Chris.
Next up, we have building and department reports and the superintendent's report.
So I'm going to begin by just reinforcing that one of our themes this year is hashtag belonging matters. So through that theme, I am hosting a superintendent's coffee, welcoming in any of our parents, any of our community leaders on September 23rd. That will be just outside of my office. That'll be at 8:30 a.m. and certainly we'll provide coffee, and any and all are welcome. Along that theme as well, we have a community conversation on Thursday, October 5th at 6 p.m. in the Commons area. And as many of you know, we have kicked off a reboot of our strategic plan. So 7 years ago, we began a journey in Grandview Heights where we revisited our mission. We also created our beliefs, our characteristics, and we established our 3 enduring core goals. We are taking a look at those and reevaluating them and thinking about what is it that we want for our graduates to know and be able to do in 2030, in 2040. And what does school look like, and what will school look like in order to meet tomorrow's graduate? So we're trying to force our participants in thinking about that reality so that we have, and one of the reasons that this is so important, as all of you know, because I talk about our continuous improvement plan all the time. And that one of the things that's really important for a superintendent to do is to establish what 3 core things are we as an organization going to focus on. And when we're able to focus on a narrowly established set of objectives on an annual basis, that's when we are able to, as a collective team, move the proverbial needle. When we get distracted and we're not focused and we're all over the place but nowhere, then we aren't able as an organization to be effective and proverbially move the needle. So it is the CIP that, and it's the strategic plan that drives our organization and being able to accomplish. And I think a really tangible example is the room that we're in now. 7 years ago, this was part of a strategic plan. It was a dream. And through the collective efforts of all of us and our ability to focus our human capital and energy on this, we were able to accomplish it. So it's really important. I want to thank Chris Dice and Angie Olam and our team for bringing Parent Square to Grandview. I think that has been, for every person I've talked to has raved about it. And if I'm forgetting somebody, I apologize, but I know those two were heavily involved. And I think it's been really well received by our parents as a communication tool. I want to thank our CKE team for working with us and hosting our alumni tours. We had 3 graduating classes last Friday come through and get a tour of our Grandview Heights High School, which is always really fun, not only to meet our graduates and graduating class, but to see their reactions of the restored or renovated high school. Looking forward to homecoming week, October 2nd through the 8th. A big shout out to the Bobcat Boosters for hosting another hugely successful, I think it actually set a record for the Ox Roast in terms of the most money generated. So congratulations to them. And that's my report.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Before we move on, Eric, did we offer an opportunity for hearing of the public?
We did.
Did I skip that? Okay, I
Yes.
just missed it. Got it. Thanks.
And there was no one that took me up on the offer
Great. I just wanted to make sure.
at that time. Just one question. I was reading with interest about the Parent Square and the new communication tool, and not being a parent, and I don't have personal knowledge of that. So just
Being a grandparent now.
being a grandparent, I moved on. Is that a K-12? So there's one system now for parents?
Yeah, that's
If they
the-
have kids in 3 different buildings.
We could
show
all
it
show
to
you.
you. Got the app?
Yeah, so it's an app and it is, so the goal, one of the goal is to unify our communication system so that there aren't grade levels or teachers using a disparate communication tool with parents. Additionally, our goal is to also include athletics under this umbrella. Now, we aren't fully 100% there, but I'm very optimistic, and even more optimistic today than when we began this journey because of the feedback that we're getting, and also myself becoming a little more familiar with the communication tool. I think it was a great choice. I can't take any credit. It was Angie and Chris and the team. And so it was their decision that drove this, not me. But I think, so I have no skin in the game other than to say I think it's a wonderful decision, and it's proven to be very successful.
Yeah, you can also, just some of the things I like about it too, you can, whenever you're looking at a posting in the app, you can comment directly there, and whoever, like, if my kid's teacher, gave us a summary of what they did for the week and I had a question about it, I can comment directly in the app and they see it and they can comment back, and it can be private, like one-on-one. So, and you can like choose between your students, or there's like ones that go for the whole district,
And I'll make a comment. I had no plans to do this. So as all of you know, I am a father also of 3 sons. And, there's been instances where my sons have been in 3 different buildings, and all 3 are so for example, one might be in cross country, another might be in travel baseball, another might be in travel soccer, and another might be doing something else, in a play. And I am not exaggerating. Every single one of those uses a different communication app, and every single school uses a different communication app. So having from a parent, I'm talking, you know, all of this under one umbrella is honestly unimaginable in a dream.
Different passwords that you have to remember.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
And it archives everything too, so you don't have to like go back and try to find like an old email, you know, like I don't need to go try to look for the old email. It's all still there.
Archives.
You can just like scroll down and see where it was.
Yeah.
Well, great to hear. Thank you. Anything else, Andy, before we move on to the construction part? I asked Jay to come up. Thanks for being here and being patient.
Absolutely. Yep, glad to be back again. Happy Construction Appreciation Week.
Oh,
Hey.
All reality, Andy, Beth, Chris, Haley, thanks for recognizing us and as always making us feel like we belong and a part of the team as we accomplish this next phase of our construction project.
Real quick on those lines, we are, the team, the construction team, and all of the vendors, are going to take a picture tomorrow at 2:30 in front of Grandview Heights School and post it on Facebook, our webpage, tweet it out. And so that's kind of, I mean, a fun little Construction Appreciation Week
That's great.
event.
Yeah, and that was the
Yeah.
district's
It's going to be
idea.
trending pretty soon.
Oh, for sure, that'll go viral, yeah.
And we appreciate that. Yeah, so thanks. But we were up here 3 weeks ago, and even only being 3 weeks ago, there's so much more to talk about still. I don't know if there's we tried to do everything we could to keep the aroma of sealing the gym floor on that side of the bearing wall. I think we did a great job, but, and give Chris Tayo, our superintendent, credit for that. But, striping's down, and from the weight room mezzanine looking down, it just looks fantastic. And then they've got one coat on, and the final coat will go on tomorrow. And next step will be bleachers, wall padding, and we're gonna be there. It's great. It's great news. From the outside, we poured the learning area concrete, and around the north, the main entrance, the topsoil has been respread. So next steps, and really the perfect time to plant grass is to plant grass and plantings around that. And then, so again, good planning and that we were able to do that. And so by the time, this November comes around, we should have some really nice looking grass and frontage for that area. Up in the auditorium, the wall paneling and the lighting continues to move forward. The spacing between the panels is so precise that it is a process and it's taking a little while, but the whole, we'll say stage, would that be stage right or stage left, Colleen, is complete? Stage right. Learning this, yep. So stage right side of the paneling is done, and they're moving on to the left side now. And a lot of the ceiling attributes are being done, so that painting will happen very soon. And then by the time we meet again, the back half of the auditorium will have sound panels that are going to be installed. Very extensive, nice sound panels to really bring the space up. So by the time we talk, that'll be underway. By the time we talk next month, that'll be underway as well. Another real feature point of the project is down on the first floor, right outside of the tech area is a collab area. There's a 60-foot long hexagonal, really decorative, really sharp looking light fixture. So next time you're able to take a tour, and I'm gonna brag on the electrician again, but they did such great planning that you'll see how it's coordinated with where the HVAC and the airflow devices come right down, right in the middle, everything, and for it to be as long as this room, came together really perfectly, and they did a great job on that as well. Sorry, not in any particular order, so kind of back to the gym. The locker room epoxy, we did an upgrade to the speckled Bobcat Blue epoxy flooring, that's complete. I didn't walk in it because it just got done yesterday or today, I believe, so come Monday, we'll be able to go in there and check that out. So another great feature that's come along. And then what we've been working on as well is as soon as recent as today is planning for that move-in process. So today we met with Brad Gintert and we talked about when the tech and the wood shop equipment is going to be moved in. Locating that with all the electrical components that go with that, or the electrical feeds that go with that, and the timing around our inspections. So we've done that. We talked with Brad Bertani today as well, with the athletic, the weight room equipment, the weightlifting equipment as well, and when that's going to come in. And working very closely, obviously, with Chris Dice on the network equipment and when the data rooms will be ready so that we have a seamless turnover coming in beginning of January. And then lastly, I'll say with Jim Bufford team have been doing a great job as well with planning punch lists and move in and making sure that cleanup and things like that are going as well. So we've been staging that path to having a final clean on the building as well. And that's kind of what we've been working on and what we're doing.
Doors.
Doors are here. That was my first note, and I skipped right over it. It was a big deal, and a little bit of worry, and again, I can't tell. But the district made a decision to allow the grain of the wood doors to change slightly, so that we could get the doors on time, and I think the entire east half of the second floor doors are already swinging, and we held off on carpet because it captures the most dirt and stuff till we can contain a room and clean a room. And so a lot of the what makes a room look like it's unfinished is not having the flooring in. So some of those rooms have everything done except for the flooring, but yet it looks unfinished. So come the next couple of weeks, now that we can close doors and we can clean and we can keep, trades and people out of the rooms, we're going to start to carpet those rooms, specifically like the media center on the second floor, some of the small group rooms and conference rooms and things like that. So yeah, we also have epoxy flooring in the servery that matches the middle school servery. On the high school side, that's complete as well.
When are we gonna get a tour?
I'm available after this.
And I did have another question. You mentioned Media Center. Are we still referring to that as the Brotherhood of Rooks?
Yeah, so the way that, at least in my understanding, it was always and correct me if I'm wrong here, it was Grandview Heights High School Media Center, but there was a Brotherhooks of the Room, Brotherhooks Room.
Brotherhood of the Rooks.
Yes, thank you. Brotherhood of the Rooks Room.
Okay.
And in that room, so if you walked into the old media center, it was right to the right, and in that room there was I'll use the word memorabilia.
Okay.
Maybe 3 or 4 different pictures. So my plan was we saved all of those, and in the new media center, there's, I think, 4, as opposed to, remember there was 1 conference room, and there's 4 in the new media center, to make one of those conference rooms a Brotherhood of the Rooks conference room.
Okay.
Similar in like. So yes, to answer your question.
Thanks for answering that.
And we have doors on those
Yep.
now.
Yes,
Exciting.
very exciting.
I'm not looking till January.
Okay, all right.
The bike pad
Haven't been there
on
since
the
April.
east,
Yes, Jay?
looking good.
Yeah, I
too.
was skeptical,
Thanks
but
for your
you-
patience,
yeah.
as we had some snow fence around that, little grading that we're working.
So for everyone's full disclosure, and I think this is actually important because I've been asked about this probably 4 times, and I bet you, especially now that I say it, one of you, if not all of you, will get asked about it. Why is the bike rack on the east side? So if you were to walk out these doors and go left, so low, it's almost awkwardly low. And if you haven't noticed, now that I've said it, when you go out there, you're like, oh my gosh, that's awkwardly low.
I noticed it, yeah.
So the reason that it's awkwardly low is because there have been multiple coordination meetings between the CKE team and the city of Grandview and EP Ferris, which is the engineer for around grading. And so the road, when Fairview goes through, is going to be at the level of the bike rack or lower. And so it won't look as awkwardly low once the full project is built out as it does now, but it does now.
Thank you.
Which is next summer, so it's not that long.
Yeah, no, it's not that long, but I'm just telling you, you will get asked. At some point, someone's gonna be like, hey, the project looks great, but what's going on with that bike rack? Why is it so low?
No, you just addressed it. We won't.
Okay, well, I hope you're right.
I think everyone watch it, please.
I do.
I will say from, following along with the core team, that it does seem like we're in a different phase at this point. We're kind of getting toward the end game, doing some contracting issues, the parking lot, some of the little add-on type things at the end. But, we were in a phase there of, with the renovation particularly, it just seemed like, every 2 weeks there was like one more thing that we were discovering, and usually bad news. And really feels like we've gotten beyond all that, and, the issues that have gone from like a whole bunch to like very kind of minimal things. So as I was reflecting, there wasn't a whole lot to report on really from the core team, but
No.
I'll ask Emily.
I always go back and look at the minutes from the last meeting to see what we reported on then, to see if anything's changed. And the only thing was that we mentioned last time, it's in the minutes, about the possibility that we were exploring the possibility of redoing the sidewalk in front of the high school. And it was talked about a lot, and decided not to pursue that right now. Maybe revisit it later, but just kind of see where everything falls out when it's actually open. And if it's really terrible, maybe we can revisit it with, the final phase of the site plan, so.
Kind of speaking to that, as we move towards the end and we have certain contingencies left, is that a core team, a finance team, or a full board discussion?
Yeah, good question, and, obviously it's up to the board. I think there's, one point is, there is this phase that we're getting to the end of, to opening the building. And, there's more to be done with the demolition and the site work after that, but, that's a phase, and personally, I'm like really driven toward making it as clean as possible for the team to do what's designed and do that and focus on that and get ready, because the most important thing is, to have the team, everybody be able to move in over winter break and all that. And so, obviously if there's some things like we've discovered with the gym floor, that had to extra vapor barrier, that's not something you can say, let's put off.
Right.
You have to do it, at that time. But other stuff, even if it's good idea stuff or stuff we want to consider, it's not necessarily that we have to do it now.
Sure, secondary.
So, yeah, and it's not like the money goes away either. If we end up with a project and there's, $400,000 left over, then we have $400,000 that we can decide to put, to spend on this or that, whether it's,
Okay.
The
That's
track or do more concrete work or add more trees or anything like that.
That's helpful.
Or
Okay.
some of it will be like time sensitive though, where we can't wait until the entire thing's done. Or we could, but we might be spending more money that way. But, we've had, when we had our, what am I trying to say? We had our board retreat where we talked about a number of add-on things. And for much of it, we decided to sort of hold back
Right.
because we want to see where the budget lands.
Exactly, yeah.
Soon enough, we might want to revisit some of that. For example, the one big thing was whether we wanted to do more with the front lawn, the multi-purpose field that was going to be out here. I know we kind of discarded the idea of putting turf there, but we did talk about a more, I don't even.
Higher grade sod.
The higher
Right.
grade, yeah, and whether, as we're getting closer and it looks like we might have some, if that's something we want to pursue or not.
For sure.
So,
think
I mean.
also, just from a financial perspective, we've been cutting it pretty close. Kind of been on the mode of not assuming that there's anything left over. Again, I think as the weeks go past and there's not more bad news, that's helpful. And Doug keeps reminding us that there's, some contingencies set aside that, may not get spent, that sort of thing. So that picture will become clearer as well. I mean, I think very driven as a board to not go over.
Sure.
And so, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we have some at the end, and then we can decide what to do with that.
I understand the secondary nature of making sure that we primarily get kids in the building, and for sure.
There was one thing I don't think we've mentioned at a board meeting that has been discussed at core team, and that is the speakers in the auditorium. That, I don't know if you want to talk about it or not, just that, as the auditorium's the full vision is coming to fruition, they've noticed that the speakers that were not going to be replaced, kind of stand out as being dirty, rusty, not quite bright white like other things. So they're pursuing the idea of taking one down, taking some down, I don't know, to see if they could clean them up and make them look nicer. I'm not sure where that stands right now, but that was gonna be like phase one. Can we clean these up and make them look nice?
So we're trying to, in other words, the speakers function,
Yeah.
but they, as objective and unbiased as I can say, they do stand out. So, so the first option is take one down, see if we can clean it up.
Yeah.
And paint it so that it matches the aesthetic, which we are optimistic about. So that's good news.
Yep, thank you for sharing. And we did, I mean, we went and walked through one time, well, after a core team meeting one time, we walked over there to check it out, and I do, like I agree with Andy, I do feel like presently they stand out in a negative way, but hopefully this works, so.
Anything else on construction? Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Colleen.
Jay?
Colleen, thanks for your feedback.
Yeah, you guys are appreciated.
We move on to business and finance and the treasurer's presentation.
Okay, so I just have a pretty brief presentation tonight. Just wanted to share some updates on where we are financially through the end of August. So we have received our first half tax settlement of the fiscal year, so it's the second half 22 tax settlement, and we're at just about 47% of the budget, and that is very, very typical and almost exactly where we project. Generally, more taxpayers pay the full bill the first settlement of each calendar year, which is our second settlement of the fiscal year. So typically, the first settlement of our fiscal year is a little below 50%. The next one will be a little over 50%. So that is right on target. Our state funding is right where we expect that to be. The homestead and rollback from that first settlement has not been settled yet. That money will come from the state very soon. The Grandview Yard money I mentioned at our last board meeting came in from that tax settlement, and we are at about 51.5% of the budget for the fiscal year. So that budget comes from those revenue projections that Baker Tilly does for us each year. So we will actually get a little bit more money from that Grandview Yard from the city in terms of a little bit of homestead rollback money will come from that as well. Interest for the month was just over $40,000. Expenditures, we are right on track. I explained last month, we start out a little bit above the budget to date the first couple months of the year and kind of gradually get closer to that target. Investments, we kind of strategically plan for funds that we're not going to need in the immediate term and keep those invested. So the average yield on those outstanding right now is 1.47. Looking at the construction fund, the interest for the month was just over $16,000. And we're at about $1,823,000 in project-to-date interest. So that's really pretty remarkable. I expect to get about $1.84 million. So, as we're kind of winding down, the interest is kind of trailing down as well. But I expect to get at least to that $1.84 million mark. So we've got a little bit few investments left. The fund balance is getting pretty low in that fund, comparatively speaking. Soft costs 79%, construction costs almost 87% spent, and our fund balance is now under $10 million, so about $9.9 million. And I have actually made another payment since this fund balance too. So we are winding down. Investments left to maturity about 1.7%. And then just kind of wrapping up with the permanent improvement fund. Really the only change to the permanent improvement fund since last month, part of our 5-year PI plan has been, and we've had this in for a number of years, is to replace the smart boards at Stevenson with TV monitors. And this was the year that we had planned to do that for quite some time. So that is also in the works. So nothing new to update there, and that's all I have. So one other thing I wanted to share is the Finance Committee will meet on Monday, and I have been working on updating the 5-year forecast, so I will have that to share, which is pretty exciting.
It's exciting.
Yes.
Yay.
So I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday, too.
And with the timing there, then there's no report from the Finance Committee.
Right, we have not met since the
I was
last
paying attention.
school
Look
committee.
Look at you.
We will move on to then the recommendations for approval. We have item 9C 1 through 9. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments about any of these items?
So if I can just explain real quick, number 6 is a memorandum of agreement with some final revisions to some supplemental contracts. And there's a few final cleanup things that we did as part of that MOA. And before we finalize the union contract that we have printed and binded and have gotten all finalized, everybody's signed off now. So just to give you a quick explanation, a number of years ago, I think it even predates Andy and I, there was a handful of supplemental contracts that were negotiated to move from the indexed salary schedule, the one that increases each year, to the flat stipend amount. But the teachers that were in those positions at the time were grandfathered in until there was a change. So as of now, there were 5 of those positions that still showed up on both schedules, but there had been a change. So basically, there were 5 outdated positions still included on the old schedule. So we thought now was the time to clean that up while we were finalizing the new agreement. There were also 2 positions that have always been in our schedule that we all thought were to remain in, and just the way that just kind of the back and forth and the way the final tentative agreements were written up, they were omitted. So that is no change from where what we have had in the agreement before. And then the final thing was one supplemental contract, I believe it was Model UN Advisor. We had done an MOA mid-contract a few years ago to move that from a flat amount to the index schedule to give it a bump in pay, and that did not get incorporated into the agreement. So we realized that kind of after we had finalized everything, so that is cleaned up in here as well. So it keeps everything consistent. The changes that we have in here just keep everything the way it was, and then it gets rid of those 5 that are no longer applicable.
That's really helpful. So really clean up. There were a couple that I think seemed to be from what was presented as being eliminated. I think one was the chess.
So
I thought, well, is this a decision to not have a chess team anymore? or
Yeah,
is
that's
this-
a
okay.
great question.
Yeah.
So Chess Club is one of the 5 that moved from an indexed, so as base salaries go up, that supplemental would go up each year, to a flat stipend. And the advisor who has always done Chess Club is no longer doing Chess Club. So there's going to be a new teacher filling that position. And so now that old teacher has been was grandfathered in, now that he is no longer doing it, it reverts to the flat stipend amount.
Gotcha.
So, yep, just clean
That's
up.
helpful.
Really. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Beth, would you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Doucet?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
Next, we have personnel, 10A, turn the page again,
14, I think.
1 through 14.
So moved.
Second.
And I do believe, it's been moved and seconded. I do believe this was one area that when we had the update, just like in the last day of what had been published, there were a couple changes here.
Yes.
Just to note that if someone had been looking at the like 3-day-old version. But a lot of detail here, so appreciate all that went into getting this correct. Are there any questions or comments? Beth, would you call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Doucet?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
On board policy and procedure, do we have a policy committee report?
We did not meet.
Move on to curriculum and instruction. Is there a teaching and learning committee report?
We did not meet.
You put
We are very
board
efficient this
meetings
morning.
like 3 weeks apart. It's-
Yeah.
That's right. It's been a abbreviated time. Under item 13, co-curricular activities and extracurricular activities, we have a list of volunteers to approve. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Beth, call the roll.
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Doucet?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
And is there any other items that any board member would like to bring up at this point?
Yeah.
Great. I don't believe we have executive session today, so I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Gotcha.
I'd be glad to give anyone a tour that would like to stay, in all seriousness.
Okay. Andy.
No, I'm
I mean,
serious.
I would love to see it, but I don't wanna keep anybody here.
No.
I'm glad, if anyone would like a tour, I'm glad to
I
give you one.
would.
Okay.
Okay, great.
There you go.
I wanna see the structure that's at the front, the light.
Oh, it's
Me too.
unbelievable.
Really?
It's remarkable.
That's so cool.
Did we adjourn?
So did the
I was
alumni?
interrupted.
I'm so sorry.
We are still
We
in
have to
session
adjourn.
though.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We voting to adjourn.
Sorry.
I thought we adjourned.
We haven't voted. We moved the motion.
Yes.
That's right.
Beth, you wanna get us in order, please?
Mr. Bodie?
Andy, sit
Aye.
down.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Doucet?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye. Andy,